Hello, everyone. My name is
Um, Good evening, everyone. Speaking to you, we would like to welcome Dr. Bond, but let me introduce for you the today's lectures. So, good evening, everyone. Speaking to you, Dr. Ghadir Al Mutari from the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in the College of Education at Kuwait University. I welcome you all to the final day of the series of webinars organized by the EDC, the Educational Development Center at the College of Education here in Kuwait University, and I would like to thank Dr. Aisha Al Azmi for organizing this prolific forum, uh, which is titled "The COVID-19 and How It Changing the Nature of Education." This goes under the supervision of our Dean, Dr. Fawzia Hadi. Let me introduce for you Dr. Bond, which will speak about digital learning innovations. Dr. Bond expertise come from the field of instructional design and technology. His areas of research include professional development, learning communities, communities of practice, constructivist, social constructivist learning environments, and meaningful course design. Dr. Bond is a senior director and provide leadership for TLOS, which stands for Technology Enhanced Learning and Online Strategies at Virginia Tech University. TLOS work focus on reaffirming the role of departments and colleges in supervising and evaluating teaching in all modalities. Their services offering are intended to support faculty and administrations in their efforts to create and deliver quality online courses. Dr. Bond today will tell us more about TLS work at VT, Virginia Tech, and shed the light on the creation and delivery of fully compliant and effective engaging online and hybrid blending environment, the difference between remote learning and emergency teaching, and TLS response to COVID-19. So we would like to thank Dr. Band for accepting our invitation. And today's title will be The Future is Intentional Systematic Planning for Flexible Learning. So we would like to welcome you, Dr. Bond, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I work as mentioned in technology enhanced learning and online strategies at Virginia Tech. About a year and a few months ago, in March 18th of 2020, um, we rapidly shifted from a regular school year where everyone was, or not everyone, but most of our students were attending in person. Most of our instruction, at least undergraduate instruction, was in the classroom. Um, a good number of our online master's degrees programs are not included in what I'm saying. We have 18 master's degree programs that can be taken online. But in our undergraduate programs, most of that instruction happened in face-to-face environments. Probably like many of you, um, we were taken by surprise with the immediate need to shift our instruction to an online environment. We had to do that shift to what we called emergency remote teaching. My colleague, Barbara Lockey, a colleague of ours from the University of Georgia, the University of Virginia, Stephanie, let's see, Chuck Hodges, we wrote an article for EDUCAUSE that has become one of the most cited articles in the past year and a half in the field of educational technology about the difference between emergency remote teaching and an actually planned experience for online or flexible learning. We, in our article, discussed how important it is to make the distinction that what we did a year and some months ago to shift all of that instruction online was an emergency response. It was not a systematic look at how to build instructional strategies or how to do pedagogical interventions with our students And it wasn't really a good way to teach online. And in fact, many of the instructors at Virginia Tech, not only did they struggle to get their content online, but they struggled to interact with their students, to engage their students in any sort of meaningful way during the remainder of spring 2020 semester. When we got to fall, TELOS, Technology Enhanced Learning and Online Strategies, where I work, we spent all summer working with faculty, getting them prepared to teach online. While we did not have a completely online fall semester, the majority of the courses that we taught spring of 2021 and fall of 2020 were online or in some sort of hybrid format. And that's why what I'm talking about today is systematic planning for flexible opportunities for learning. And that could be completely online. We have these terms like hybrid and blended and mixed modal. We have a lot of different terms that people throw around that mean different things to different people. They're all different ways of describing how you might have a flexible learning a platform or a strategy to keep quality instruction going. And the key to this whole thing is not treating it like an emergency situation. We did that. We had to do our emergency triage on our courses a year and a half ago. But when we got to summer, we got to spend time with faculty. We built communities of practice with faculty looking at how to do labs online, how to teach large classes, 1,000 students plus. How do you do that online, and what tools and strategies can you do? So we engaged the faculty in that process. We didn't try to top down create these situations. But so what I'm going to share with you today is a lot about how you do the systematic planning, how you engage your content and your students and learn about both of those in ways that help you build a meaningful experience in whatever modality that you want to teach your students in. So I've talked a little bit about emergency remote teaching, and if I were with you, or you could actually contact me, maybe you can put this in the comments in the YouTube, but if you had to think about one word or phrase about your experience with emergency remote teaching, what would that be? And if you don't want to write it, I just want you to think about it. Where were you a year and a half ago? Or where would you be if you weren't in the role of switching your class or helping someone switch their class? If you were a student, what comes to mind when you think about emergency remote teaching? And I've done this a few times, and so I'll give you some thoughts about what I've heard. I've heard pure terror. I've heard messy disorganization. I've heard disengagement. I've heard fear. I've heard from faculty. I have heard that they were overwhelmed because they had to do this all at one time while trying to still engage their students. They had to try to build the course while it was being taught. In some ways, that's like trying to build a plane while you're flying it. Like if you are building the plane and the plane is in mid-flight, it's not going to go well. Other things that I've heard about emergency remote teaching that it made the students more flexible, made the faculty more flexible, made us as teachers more engaged with our content, more thoughtful about what we actually include in what we teach. So there's been good and bad responses to remote teaching, but we have to remember doing something during an emergency time is not the same as thinking through and planning ahead of time. So as I'm going to encourage you today, as you think about your courses, or if you're in a support role working with faculty, to think about how we can plan for an uncertain future. What if we have another outbreak? What if there's an earthquake? What if there's a natural disaster that's not related to a virus? How can we plan for that uncertain future so that we do keep continuity, that we can still have courses continue on even if something like an emergency happens? Well, we can do that. We can through intentional systematic design, using and learning from the principles of human learning, we can plan for the unknown, and we can actually make meaningful pedagogical interactions and interventions for our students to prepare them um, to be learners and to prepare us to be good teachers. I just heard right before we started this conversation that many of the folks in the room are instructional designers, and I'm sure you've seen this model, and it's actually, there's an argument in the instructional design and technology world about whether this is a model or it's a process. Well, when you think about intentional design, many of us think immediately to the ADDIE model, which some refer to as the ADDIE process. And we'll talk a little bit about each of these phases. But if you are taking time to think through your design in an intentional way, the ADDIE process or model, whichever way you want to call it, is a really good way to help you with your planning. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The ADDIE model or process is not used only in instructional design. The ADDIE process is used across many industries: engineering, software design, construction. There's lots of different interdisciplinary use of this process. So it's something that makes sense in a variety of contexts. So here are some examples of activities in each phase of the ADDIE process based on designing your course. So the analysis phase is really thinking about and pre-planning your course. It's when you do your needs analysis. You look at what it is you need to teach. You look at what the major instructional goals are. You learn who your learners are. So at Virginia Tech, we do a lot of analysis on trying to figure out who our learners are, what our learners already know, what cultural context that they come from, what context that they may miss or may not know. We spend a lot of time thinking through our examples to make sure that the examples are easy to follow. I'll give you an example of my own days in teaching. I was teaching an 8th grade world history class. I was talking about the early river valley civilizations around the Nile in Egypt, around the Mesopotamia region, around the Yellow River region in China, and the importance of agriculture to society moving from a hunter-gatherer society to a society that was built around agriculture. And I had an eighth grader in Virginia in the United States, is in the 14-year-old range. So they've been around for about 14 years. And that student raised his hand when I was talking about dairy and milk products and the importance of milk to bone structure and allowing folks to grow and to live longer and to settle into these agricultural valleys. And he raised his hand and he said, Mr. Bond, I don't think you know what milk is. I was like, I know what milk is. I was like, what do you think milk is? He considered milk very much like a commercial product that was made like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or some other manufactured drink. He did not, he had made assumptions about milk because his cultural context in in an urban area within Virginia had never contextualized or never had an experience that connected for him that milk came from cows, he could go to the grocery store and he could buy milk. So therefore he associated milk with being very much like any other processed or human-made product. And so it was, I made assumptions about what my students knew. And so it's always good to spend time thinking through what your students know, who your students are, where they come from, and the context. You should do that in any modality, any mode that you are teaching. Design is when you actually think through and design your course on paper, or you design, it doesn't have to be on paper. It's just, it's where you're sketching out the overall context of your course. You need to write your learning objectives, and you should write your learning objectives based on what you want your learners to be able to do. And that's hard. And we spend, oftentimes we spend a little too much time building assessments and building activities that actually don't align with what our objectives are. If our objective is that students should be able to identify 5 learning theories, then they should be able to, on a test, identify or pick out those 5 learning theories. If we want our learners to describe the differences or compare the differences between the learning theories, that's a whole different activity. It's a whole different assessment to determine whether they're able to do that, right? They would have to maybe write out the differences or do a Venn diagram to show the differences. And so when you are thinking through your learning objectives, you should go ahead and start thinking, well, what activity can I do? What activity can I do to reinforce for students the objective that I want them to accomplish? And then you should also design your assessments to match those. So your assessment should match, all of these things should align. Your objective, your activity, and your assessment should all be in alignment to match. It's also where you'll, in this phase of the process, where you identify learning materials. Sometimes you'll build those learning materials that could be, or you could curate things that folks have already made that make sense for your context. And then the design phase is really when you're making your course outline. Maybe if you think about the core elements of your syllabus, the calendar being one of those things that help you organize your course into an outline. What are the major topics that you want to cover? How long do you want to spend on each context? Each topic. Development is where you create your course components and assemble them in a learning management system, whether it's Scholar or Canvas or Blackboard or D2L. That when you do the development, that's actually when you're putting your content together in the learning management system that you're going to use. And the important part of this whole flexible learning thing is having your course content somewhere accessible to your students, whether they're face-to-face, whether they're online, whether they're coming to you some during the week, some not, whether they have the ability to attend your face-to-face class through Skype or whatever. If all of your materials are built and placed somewhere that everyone in your course can connect to them, you've already beat the system. You have made it so that if anything happens, it's all there. You don't have to switch to emergency remote teaching. You have a well-built, well-designed structure that your students can go to. They can access their materials, whether they're in class with you, whether they're online, in the same place. This is the most important part. And it doesn't have to even be in the learning management system. It can be in a Google site or a Google folder or a Dropbox folder, whatever you have access to. It could be a website where you put this material and allow folks to have access to it in an organized way. That's the key, in an organized fashion. The implementation phase of the ADDIE model is when you actually teach the course. And if you can teach your course with the underlying structure of this website or LMS that you've built, much easier. You just have to show up to class or show up to Zoom or show up to your asynchronous discussion board whenever that it is when you need to be there and teach your course. And then at the end of it, you have to evaluate your students and you have to evaluate your course and yourself, helping students improve based on their assessment, helping you improve the course based on the feedback that you get from your student success. And there's so many different ways to evaluate this. I'm going to jump on to the next slide. So knowing what we just talked about, that we can use the ADDIE process to do an intentional planning, I want to talk a little bit about what this intentional design concept is. Strategic application of systematic instructional design it should be responsible to your stakeholders in the learning context. In our current situation, we are coming out of a pandemic, and we don't know what the future will hold. We don't know whether there will be a resurgence of this virus or another virus this fall and winter. We don't know how much longer that we'll have to endure these kinds of things. But there is this thing called the high flex model. It's by a guy named Beatty and Brian Beatty. And he kind of developed this structure called hybrid flex course design. It's actually been referred to often as the high flex model, abbreviating the hybrid flexible to high flex. This whole process started in California, because California and the United States endures a lot of earthquakes, endures lots of forest fires, and they often have to shut down schools and colleges and universities often when these natural disasters occur. So many universities and colleges in California have adapted hybrid or high flex course design so that whatever happens, if students start face-to-face in the semester, if something happens that causes them to shut down in-person attendance, the students can still progress through the course as though nothing is happening, because they can still learn from home because the course is already created. It's already there. And so I just wanted to show you, so this is, it's a case report of a variety of different use cases of high flex that Brian Beatty has put together. And it's a free resource. And if you just look up hybrid flexible course design, Brian J. Beatty, you should be able to get to the source. So,
Dr. Bond, for the high flex model, they already have a plan for educational crisis or educational pause, as can we say, because of a crisis or something happens. But what if there isn't a plan and the educational system was surprised with a sudden closure like what we have experienced worldwide because of the pandemic, and I think at Blacksburg or Virginia Tech, so we are not used to a sudden closure like this.
Yeah, we certainly were not ready for a closure like this. We did not have a high flex model, which is why it was completely emergency response. Faculty were scrambling to move their courses online. The folks in my unit we're scrambling to help faculty get their courses online. And I think that's what we've learned is that going forward, we have to
Yeah.
do more systematic planning so we
Yes.
don't end up in this situation again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mhm. Awesome. So we've talked a little bit about analysis and what we can learn about students, but I want to dig in here a little bit. And we've talked about prior knowledge, but when we're talking about designing or planning for online development or high flex or hybrid, what all of these different words, whatever you're planning for, you got to consider the physical location, right? You got to know what technologies that your students have access to at their location. You have to, is there broadband? Is there enough internet connection or enough bandwidth on the internet connection for your students for you to build videos and have students look at the videos? Or do you need to do more low tech approaches that account um, for the technology affordances and the bandwidth affordances for your students? We also have to think about how comfortable that the students are with different approaches and technologies. In Brian Beatty, in his high flex model, suggests that while you have your students face to face, if the emergency hasn't happened yet, you've done your intentional planning, you have your course designed for whatever happens. In the first week, teach your students how to use the different modalities that they may need to use in your course if an emergency happens. So thinking through, if an emergency happens, we're going to switch to Zoom or we're going to switch to this website. Letting the students know that ahead of time will help with the transition when and if it does happen. We've talked a little bit about learning outcomes and how to make them explicit to students. This link is to Bloom's taxonomy. It's one of the things that I was alluding to a moment ago. But Bloom's taxonomy, if we were to, it is a taxonomy of different verbs that help you determine how you might structure your outcome or your objective. One of the things that I would like for you to think about, though, when you're designing your course, is to think about what instructional methods and what in supporting media that you might have to teach your course. So the United States Distance Learning Association has created an instructional media selection guide for distance learning that has implications for blended learning as well. And this is the second edition of that. It is available for free, but it's a little outdated, but it does go through some really interesting things for you to consider and to think about when you are choosing the tool that you want to disseminate the information with. Gadir, I think what I will do, I'll send you this presentation for you to share with the audience participants, and then I'll send you a separate file with all of these links connected, if that would be helpful.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
But I think that these are really good resources to help you think through which media that would, or the technologies that would help you based on the interaction that you want to provide. Another free tool is Teaching with Digital Tools and Apps. This is by Tori Trust. Tori is one of the co-authors on the article that we wrote for EDUCAUSE. And I think you would find this very helpful as well. And all of these are free. And so I'm every resource that I'm providing in this talk is free because I want to make sure you have access to the things, which brings up the importance of the tools and media that you choose. Knowing you should have a really good understanding of your audience and understand what tools they have access to. And if there's any barrier whatsoever, financial barrier, accessibility barrier, it's good to try to mitigate that in your planning process and to choose technologies and instructional support that doesn't cause a barrier for your students. This is a worksheet example that Dr. Lockie and I developed to help think through how you can design activities in your course in such a way that if you design 2 or 3 activities per objective, then you can you'll be prepared if there's an emergency. It doesn't hurt to have a backup plan, right? If my learning outcome is to differentiate between the 3 major learning theories, that's what I want my students to do. If I have them face to face, I can put them in small groups. They can collaborate to create a Venn diagram, so they can do 2 circles overlapping, and in the Venn diagram, they can put how they're separate, how they're the same. Actually, with three Venn diagrams, I mean 3 circles, and so they could collaborate and they could do that together. That's a really neat, fun activity that helps our students differentiate, helps them understand the differences and commonalities that between the 3 major learning theories.
Dr. Bond, how can we associate this? It's a great worksheet, but how can we associate it with, you mentioned that class size matters when designing. So is there something that we should avoid if we had like larger class sizes?
Sure. So
Yeah.
I think this activity would work well in any class size. What you might do, instead of doing small groups, you just may have students work alone, because our outcome isn't differentiate between the different major learning theories in a group. There's nothing in my outcome that says that it has to be a group. It's just that students need to be able to differentiate. And so one thing you can do in a large class is just have students do this activity alone. Or if it makes sense, breaking a large class up into small chunks is also good. When if you're using Zoom or another video conferencing tool, we could easily have a class of 500 students, and we could place those 500 students into breakout classrooms in Zoom, and they could still work together to do that. Probably easier to do that if everyone is online at the same time than whether we have some attending face to face and some separate.
Yes, and sometimes technology helps in assessing the students, so
right.
Doesn't take time really.
Yeah.
So thank you.
But if you would, I would like for you to take just a couple of minutes, and I know that this is a lie, but I just want you to think about a learning outcome that you have and do some reflection of, if I were going to teach this learning outcome that I have in my head, what activities might I do or have students complete that are asynchronous, synchronous online, or face-to-face? And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, because then if we were doing a more interactive presentation, I would ask you to report back to me what your learning outcome is, and some examples of your activities. But I do want you to reflect on this and to take some notes about what you might do here. One activity that I do in my class when I have students online, and I'm doing a presentation, I give them guided notes. So they have to answer questions as they're listening to the presentation, it allows students to pay attention to what's happening, or it actually forces them to pay attention to what's happening in the classroom, and it helps reinforce the presentation. Right now, you're passively listening to me talk, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to help improve transfer of knowledge, if you want to improve information getting from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, having some reflection time in your presentation, or having students follow along and fill in and answer questions is a great way to solve some of those problems. So we talked about assessment design. Assessment efforts should definitely align with your targeted outcomes. Take advantage of the LMS features to create testing instruments, as I think that was Goodyear that was just talking about, that the technology can actually help grading much more easy for you as professionals. But it also gives some instant feedback to students. What we do know about feedback is that our students need feedback in order to improve. We need to make multiple options for assessment, especially when we move into continuity efforts. If we're doing flexible learning, we need to make all effort to include quick feedback so that students can learn from their mistakes as they prepare for the inevitable summary assessment. Here are some on the list of links that I send out to Goodyear. That well, I was going to say any questions there. Do we have any questions in the chat or in the YouTube channel, Goodyear, that before we go ahead, or do you want to wait to the end?
We have a question about the Virginia Tech experience during this pandemic, but we can keep that to the end if you would like, or you can answer it now.
Okay, I'll leave that to the end, because
Okay.
we've talked a little bit about design and assessment and thinking about our students, thinking about our course, but now we need to think about how much that we build, right? And how we structure things in an online environment to help students learn. What I have learned from my own children attending remote learning, teaching in remote learning, and helping faculty move to online learning is organization is key. Too often, I have seen my own kids, I've seen my own students, and I've seen faculty struggle to find the information that they need. The technology should not be a barrier. The course should not be a barrier. The course should give the correct amount of information, should be organized in a logical fashion so that students don't spend time having to fill their cognitive load, fill their capacity in their brain to learn with trying to find information. What we do know in the information processing theory is that we as humans see and hear things all the time. Our brain is constantly trying to figure out what you are seeing and what you are hearing that you should pay attention to, or that you should have in short-term memory. When when something captures the brain's attention, or a pattern causes the brain to be like, oh, I know that, or I recognize that, it comes into the short-term memory. Well, it doesn't stay in short-term memory. It sits there for a short time. And if you don't do anything with that, if you don't rehearse or chunk or pay closer attention to what you have in your short-term memory, it will not go to your long-term memory. And what cues that we use in our short-term memory to get information to our long-term memory is what cues we will need to get it back from long-term memory. How many times have you tried to recall something and you knew that you knew the answer, or you knew what that was asking, or you knew who that was, but the cue that you encoded that information with was not the same cue you were trying to get the information back from long-term memory with. And so you couldn't retrieve it. What we also know about the brain is what we can hold in our working memory or our short-term memory at any given time is very limited. George Miller did a study in the 60s that said it's 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. More recent studies have said that that's really more like 5 plus or minus 2 pieces of information. The harder we make our course to navigate, the more the messier that the course is, the harder it is for our students to figure out what we want them to learn, because they're having to fill their working memory with navigational stuff. And we don't want that. We don't want the navigation of our course to hinder or interfere with learning. Here's an example that I want you to think about. In our brains, we can easily do 12 plus 13. 12 plus 13 is 25. In my working memory, I could do that. It was so simple. It was just a couple of chunks of information. I've seen these numbers many, many, many times because I've talked about this a lot. But there's no way that my mind can work that out. My mind can't even comprehend what those numbers are, because there's not a pattern to those numbers. There are not commas where I think commas should be to help me understand what those numbers are. And so my working brain is broke. I can't do it. I can't do anything. And my brain is still trying to figure this out. So I'm stuck. What do I do next? And so I have to stop looking at that. I have to stop paying attention to that just to move on to the next slide. So as you think about your course, how you design your course, how you build your course, the students that are in your course, really think about creating a weekly plan. A weekly plan that has an overview, that has the objectives that you want the students to do that week. And if it's not a week, if it's by unit, if it's by 2 weeks, 3, however, and whatever makes sense for you and your course, create a plan, put your overview, what do you want the students to know about what this week's lesson is, or this lesson is about, your objectives, access right there in the same structure for content, the activities, and any links to assessment that you want them to do. If you do this, and you do it on a regular, logical, structured plan, you will take out the barrier that is often found when technology enters the picture. So I do have some closing thoughts, because we want to leave time for questions. As you think through your course, standardize on the tools and the structure. What I just showed you is just one example of how you might do it, but do what makes sense in terms of structure for you, and don't and standardize on a tool. What is that tool going to be? Is it a website? Is it the LMS? Is it whatever it is, standardize on it and stick with it. Don't change from one tool or structure in a given semester. Too many channels of information will cause cognitive load. We kind of experienced that. Show empathy, especially if you are in a situation where you've started out the year face-to-face and you've switched to a more flexible learning environment. Do know that students are going to struggle regardless, and be empathetic with their struggles, and teach your students how to thrive in any environment. So as I mentioned before, have those discussions up front in the first week of class. This is what we're starting out for face-to-face. This is what we're going to do, but here's how to continue if something happens. This is our plan. Let the students know what the plan is, so that they're not surprised or shocked, or that their brains are broken when you move to a different structure. If something happens and you do need to switch tools, or you do need to change your structure, provide some orientation. Let students know the context, build some build some knowledge around the tools and structure before you switch. So those are my closing thoughts, and I am ready for your deep, thought-provoking questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bond, for the great presentation and for the intentional systematic planning for flexible learning. We've learned a lot from you. We have a couple of questions about the ADDIE model that you have started with. Each phase of the ADDIE model, I think we should do an evaluation. So in an emergency situation like we are living, do we have enough time to deeply think and evaluate each of the phases?
So that's a good question, and I do think that we do want to evaluate each phase, but the reality of the situation has been such that we haven't been able to evaluate the situation as much as we would want to. At Virginia Tech in particular, I can tell you our team, even so, we did emergency remote situation stuff last spring. We spent all summer building courses and building the structure that we just talked about, building it so that students could go into a class, they knew what was expected, they knew the course structure, and we standardized on a 15-week lesson structure. So we have 15 weeks in a semester. So each week, students knew what assignments were due each week, what content they needed to read or learn each week, videos that they would be watching, any classes they would be attending on Zoom. It was all in that structure. So that we did in some ways evaluate the end result, but we did not evaluate every phase, as the questioner mentioned, that it hasn't worked out realistically to do that.
Yes, I agree with you. Realistically, it's hard to evaluate each of the phases and take enough time. For non-ID or non-instructional designers in our audience, could you clarify to them how long does it normally take to create an online course, comparing it to a face-to-face course, or how, like in a regular situation, not in a crisis, how long does it take to create an online course?
So that's also a good question, and I hate to say that to use this answer, but it depends, and the reason it depends is because course content is different by discipline. Course the expectations, the assignments all vary. So if I'm doing an online introduction to biology course, that's a lot of content. It's a lot of video. That's a lot of concept learning, getting the foundation. And so that course would probably take a good 6 months. If I'm doing a capstone course or a graduate course where a lot of it is reading and discussion based, that's a totally different course, and that can be done within a month, realistically. It really, and it depends on the discipline, the content, the level, and the amount of engagement and how you want to engage it. But heavy content courses are going to take a lot longer than more discussion-based courses.
Yeah, because I read like in one paper, I think that it takes normally 2 to 6 months to create a totally online course. So it takes time. So we shouldn't feel bad if we have some mistakes during the emergency creating online courses. Especially at Kuwait University, we never had online courses, so we all go face-to-face courses. So this was new to our faculty members. I have one of the questions from Suad Abdulaziz from our audience. She asked how the instructor can activate his or her presence, especially when the camera is closed.
Oh, so
like socially, yes, lots of questions talks about the use of video cam during synchronous lectures.
yeah, this is a good question. And
Yes,
so
yes,
I teach an undergraduate course in visual media.
yes.
And so um, I found that while I kept my camera on, many of my students did not want to keep their camera on. And I was okay with it during the emergency part last spring because everybody was just getting used to it. But this past fall and the spring semester that we just finished up here in 2021, I made my students, if they did not want to keep their camera on, they still had to either have a picture of themselves or I would, once a week, I had them answer a question. And their background or the picture that they chose to show the class had to match that question. So we had questions like your favorite vacation spot or your favorite food or um, what else? Pets. And even if they didn't have pets, they had to choose a pet that they would want to have. And then favorite superheroes. There were quite a variety of these things, but that prompted us to have a discussion that was not related to the content to build community and to build presence in the course. So, for example, we were having a live Zoom session. I would see pictures of different foods when we had the question about food, and we would actually have conversations, maybe 5 or 10 minutes out of the class, where we talked about why we liked the food or why somebody else's food was more impressive than others. And so you can build presence and community, oftentimes in ways that are not related to the class. But if you Virginia Tech, the policy was we could not require students to turn on video cameras, and so that
Same here in
hindered.
Kuwait, yes.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that hindered our ability, but we found creative ways around that.
Okay. I think these sounds great ideas. And same here in Kuwait that we don't require students to open their camera, but during assessments, like we can require them to open their camera, like exams and things like this.
Mhm.
Um, I have a question about like TLOS, teaching learning enhanced technology that you work for at Virginia Tech. Like what their future plans after the pandemics, like what you have learned from the pandemic, and especially regarding leadership and faculty preparation, things like this, especially that like each university, the ages of faculty are different. So some are used to technology and some are not. So
Yeah, yeah,
what's the future preparation for TLOS?
yeah. So we've always been a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to technology than other universities, at least in terms of our faculty use of technology. We have a program that I run in the Professional Development Network, which is part of TLOS, that requires faculty every 4 years to do 12 hours of professional development. And in order to get, they get a new computer every 4 years. And in order to get that computer, they have to complete 12 hours of professional development. Of that, at least 2 hours of that professional development needs to be in instructional design or technology. So they have to spend time with us engaged in learning about tools that are available or about the stuff that we have. Now, just because faculty learn about those tools doesn't mean that they're going to implement those tools or
Yes,
use them.
yes, yes,
So what I think we learned from the pandemic
yes.
is that faculty who in the past who have been resistant to technology
Mm-hmm.
were forced to use it. And we're going to try to keep incentivizing them to use the technology by engaging them. We created a community of practice of online learning quality advocates. So each department at the university, we chose a couple of faculty from each department. They had to apply, and we gave them a stipend, and we're teaching them how to be advocates for online learning quality in their departments. And we are kind of franchising technology enhanced learning and online strategies into the faculty so that the faculty become more of the experts and the, I wouldn't say experts, I would say they are the people who are going to monitor other faculty on their quality, which takes us out of a policing role and puts us more in a support role.
Yes, I think it is a greater motivation to have a new computer to attend the 12 hours, but I think we also should think how to motivate them to use and implement the technology in their teaching practices. So we are 9 p.m. at Kuwait, so it's the end of our session, and I think it's 2 in Blacksburg. So
Yeah, it's
we would
2 o'clock.
like to thank you, Dr. Bond, for the great presentation. And I am sure that we all learned a lot from your expertise as an instructional designer and your educational experience during the pandemic as well. I would also thank the Kuwait University, the ADC Center at Kuwait University for inviting you, and thank you for accepting the invitation. So, and we hope we learned, I think, a lot from Virginia Tech experience, and we think we should think about the different variables between the VT context and Kuwait context and see what we can apply from your experience.
Awesome.
Thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
having me.
Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you.